Martyn Ramsey, and welcome to this week's episode of Dominant, the Souness and Smith Years. Graeme Souness, in early October of 1986, was there to pick up his Manager of the Month cheque, a whole £250. The Manager of the Month for September. A bit of a recovery in the Rangers season, and he was justly rewarded for that. Nearly 6 months to the day since he first walked into that blue room, the media took the opportunity to ask him about a 6-month midterm report, as it were, his reflections on the club's progress. He was quite impetuous and maybe revealed a bit of his inexperience and insecurity. He said, "Sometimes I think we're getting places, then at other times I don't think we've made any progress at all. I still find it hard to grasp that I am a manager." It was about inconsistency. 1 step forward, 2 steps back, and a young man new to the job was just finding its way around that pretty difficult. To discuss these months, I'm joined by David Edgar. How are we, David?
I'm good, thank you, Martyn. It's great to be back on the show.
Great to have you. And John Cowden, all the way from Greece. Good evening, John.
Good evening. Glad it's not the Jinxes on this week. Might get some decent victories.
I think we will have some decent victories to talk about. Now, thank you everybody for the great early feedback and response to this show. But you two need to rein it in a wee bit. We will get to everything. We will be able to speak about everything over the course of the year, but a week at a time, guys. Look, it is inconsistency. So let's look at these drawbacks first, these stumbles. Can I start, John, please, with the visit of Dundee United to Ibrox in August of '86. Now, we had one at Ibrox in the midweek at home to Falkirk. McCoist again with a penalty this time, as it was at Easter Road. So, you know, a quick rebound from that Easter Road defeat. But the Dundee United game was seen as that first big home test. Beautiful sunny day. Walter Smith, obviously the assistant manager at Rangers now, but had been assistant manager at Dundee United, said it was the best he'd seen Rangers play against Dundee United for as long as he could remember. Some of that football in that first hour looked very good. Rangers were 2-0 up.
My first game, Mark.
Was it indeed? Well,
that's my first ever time I was in Ibrox Stadium, yes.
And you would have
Talking
enjoyed...
of Jinxes.
Yeah, I did.
For 60 minutes. This is why
you left early.
No. Not only did we not leave early, John, I made my poor dad go there at 1 o'clock. He couldn't even go for a pint, so we were sitting there for 2 hours, and it was a beautiful day. And for 60 minutes, I thought this football lark was just the best thing in the whole wide world, and I got such a good lesson in being a football fan that day.
Well, indeed. 2-0 up. That the second goal, McCoist gets 2, but the second one, a defence splitting pass from midfield by Souness, and he latches onto it so well. Rangers look great and should have been 3, which of course puts things to bed. But incredibly, there's a capitulation. John, Dundee United win 3-2. Most of the goals probably speaking to the lack of chemistry in this defence yet. Lack of communication between these players who, of course, never played with each other until just the last couple of weeks. Your thoughts on the game, but I'm more interested in the reaction, because go and look at the papers from the Sunday and Monday, going to town. Souness is described leaving Ibrox as a man who's just been told his house had burned down, and the pressure's on him. Can he handle these roles, player and manager, these English imports? I mean, Butcher wasn't particularly impressive in that latter stage of the game. Didn't look tuppence worth. And a Mrs. M. Robertson from Glasgow wrote to the Times to complain that Souness was making it the English Rangers instead of the Glasgow Rangers, and at exorbitant prices. Take it from someone who has known Rangers longer than most that it will not work. Your memories of that weekend, John?
Not many. I did David Holmes, as I do all the time, actually. Just once it's over, pig sick, go back and pull the covers over my head and don't read a paper for about 3 or 4 days. Felt kind of atypical. I was very upset but I wasn't overly perturbed by it. It was a kind of 1970s throwback. Where 2-0 leads at half-time, where actually you were very wary of. And we always started seasons poorly. And being the obtuse character I am, in hindsight, it was probably better to take the hits early than get off to a flyer and fall apart, as had happened under Greg and to a degree Wallace. So I think what you take away from it, not that weekend, because as I say, just is you can see how we're playing, and we're playing wonderfully. It's whether that will continue or not, but it's one of those freak results. I put it, particularly did the United beating us. It just didn't. As I said, I went to bed, or certainly didn't read a paper. Probably until the next game. Some things don't change.
Yeah.
Not overly perturbed, I got to say at this point. It is the kind of early days, and yeah, when you're trying something new, it's going to go. And it's all in context of where you're coming from. I mean, given how we had finished the previous season, the football we were playing, and perhaps the lack of optimism, pre-Souness, because we're really disappointed in that sort of Jan-Feb time. Everything is in context, not in the immediate moment. I mean, it is slitting your wrists or anything like that, but it's going away, licking your wounds and just avoiding everyone of the other privy, and also not talking about it with anybody. My father always loved to talk about these games and analyse it, and I was like, if we lose, I do not want to discuss it at all. It's just, I just go to bed. But no, there are signs. You're playing well. I mean, you can't say, as David has said, the sun's shining. Football is fantastic for an hour, and compared to getting played off the park and maybe getting a 1-1 draw, in the grander scheme of things, I think it was better. And sometimes you are better to take the hits early on, because it galvanises you and shows this is what you're up against.
You made a good point, John, and I think we'll come to something similar in a minute. That we've seen this before, or certainly guys your age at this time have seen this kind of thing before. Rangers kind of traditional slow starters. I guess what I want to try and get a sense from you, especially David, maybe just that wee bit younger, but still would have hopefully those recollections. That this is not just another season. You've never had a season as trumpeted as this. A pre-season as huge in terms of attention and expectation and fanfare. That surely the expectation, the excitement, whether you want Rangers to succeed or those who want us to fall, on our face, we are the big talking point in the country. Did that have any effect? Can you remember that?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I'm in a decent position just because, as I say, this was my first game, to give you impressions, not only really about the game but about what I witnessed, because of course, when you're 8 years old and it's your first time in the stadium and the people around you are as much a part of it as the match itself, as it is all the time. That's why you go to matches rather than watch them on television. But I remember when we came up, we went to the Cross Keys Stevenson bus, and we got there early, and as I said, my poor dad wasn't allowed to go for a pint because I made him come and come into the stadium with me. So we were outside the stadium, and there were a lot of people, and that was something, because in years to come, I would note that it wasn't as busy as that at 1 o'clock. People were hanging about. Now, it was a beautiful sunny day, and you could drink then on the street without police confiscating it from you. So there were a lot of people there, and there was this sort of, you could feel it, this excitement. Everybody was upbeat, and maybe that's the case at the start of the season. And again, maybe I overly remember it because it's been. I overly remember it because it's been, my first game, and I was obviously hypersensitive to everything. But I do think that there was more excitement there than in a normal, certainly any season since I've been to. Maybe Advocat was up there, maybe Gerrard was another one, but generally speaking, this was something different. And everybody was talking about what the game was going to be like. We go in, and my overarching memory of the game itself, the sense in the stadium, I don't know if John will agree with me on that, was impatience. And
because of the build-up.
Just in general, because of the build-up. That's a part of it. There are several aspects to it. Impatience, first of all, with getting the ball in the box. And it's funny, your woman, Mrs. M, her husband must have been sat near me, because he shouted out at one point in the second half when it got to 2 each. He shouted out, "This is like watching fucking Liverpool. Get in the box!" And I was like to my dad, "What does he mean? That's like watching?" Because you didn't see Liverpool a lot on the telly, so I only saw them in Match of the Day for like a minute or two. And he said Liverpool pass the ball a lot, and I, being young and naive, went, "Well, why doesn't he like us passing the ball?" And he's, "No, he does want us to pass the ball. He just wants us to pass it forward quicker." And I remember, but I think it is the impatience of, we've waited to see these players. So this whole Souness revolution's a couple of months old, and we've waited to see this. It's impatience to win the league, because it's been so long since we've done that. It was impatience to score a goal, and then it was impatience to get a second. And then, just as the crowd, I think, for the first time that day, began to relax and enjoy themselves, Dundee United scored. And then that kind of sense of, I remember, people got so angry, and that surprised me. People got so angry at 2-0, with a misplaced pass. And as I say, the sun's shining. My dad had bought me a hot dog. I'm having the best day of my life, genuinely up to that point. And I can't understand why people are so upset that, that somebody's misplaced a pass. And looking back, I think it was just, as I say, this sense of impatience, a sense of, right, we're supposed to be back. And now, knowing what I know about that period, it's exactly that. It's this sense of, look, we've been waiting for 10 years to win a title. We need this. We want this. You've got to deliver it. And let's get this started. Let's get this show on the road. And then, at the end, the crowd were raging. Some of the football was beautiful. But you could tell that there was definitely a culture change, because Souness wasn't. And it still happened. I don't want to make it that all of a sudden, the fullbacks were going up and down the wings and passing it and building it for the back, because that wasn't the case. But there were a lot of times where Souness in particular would get the ball and turn and pass it backwards to keep possession, and the crowd would get on him. And of course, I'm 8 years old. I love Graeme Souness. He is God. So to me, I'm like, why are they angry? How dare they? But it was that. It was just, this isn't the way that we play football. And could you hurry up and start winning, so that we can, and then hurry up and win as a title? So I think that's my overabiding memory of that day, was just this stadium was just aching to get things going. Yeah.
And it's interesting you mentioned that tension in terms of the approach, because after that, the Bayern game, we discussed with Andy and Alan last week that he'd made it very clear, look, this is the way it's going to happen. I'll get criticism for that, but I don't care. An early introduction to a man in terms of his dealings with the support through the media, dealings with the media directly, that he was going to tackle those issues metaphorically the way that he would tackle opponents literally. So it's interesting to hear that kind of tension was in the stands. We're going to ping pong about a wee bit. This won't be and then Rangers played this team and then Rangers played that team, and here were the starting 11s. I'm more interested in themes, really. John, can we go to September 20th, Rangers up at Dens Park, the only game that Butcher misses in the league. We lose 1-0. John Brown scores. Again, this kind of setback, because Rangers had done well. We had 4 league wins on the trot. We had played the Finnish side, Tampere at Ibrox, won 4-0. Robert Fleck with a hat-trick, not the last bit of...
That was Davy Cooper's night.
Davy Cooper just absolutely magical. But what I found interesting, John, so this is the Wednesday night, and Rangers have won 5 on the spin after this difficult period, and we'll come to one game in particular from that run soon. So, great. 5th win in a row, 8 undefeated since the defeat to Dundee United. And Souness says, I was very disappointed. We were very sloppy. A better team could have given us big problems the way we played. Now, that tough love, that kind of Shankly Paisley attitude, might have worked very well to this kind of battle-hardened Liverpool team with this incredible winning mentality to push them on to even higher levels. But again, you've got a fledgling team at this point in time that's maybe not going to react well to that, and he is not at this moment recalibrating his kind of standard, his kind of outlook, and instead of just bigging up the fact that, you know, we've seen some incredible stuff that night, we're on this run, he's had a go at them directly and publicly, and you get that one step back.
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, I've looked at it from it. It's not just a fledgling team; it's a fledgling manager.
Yes,
and yeah, I do wonder if he is trying out management techniques that he's witnessed from probably the likes of Alex Ferguson, you know, and others around then. He is not. He was never a great manager, but at that point, he is very much the fledgling manager with a fledgling team. And I think as much as he's trying things in the pitch, he's actually more comfortable with trying things in the pitch in terms of how we play than how he manages the team, the media, all the management stuff. I mean, it's very noticeable, given his huge media presence. How many times is Walter Smith doing the post-match interviews?
Yes.
I mean, it's almost more than 50%, I would say, just sort of flicking through. So there is that kind of tough love, but I think it's not immature. I think it's a new manager who's not immature. Really. It's inexperience. Yeah. Immature was the wrong one. It's inexperience, and I think it shows. But you're dealing with a dressing room with some big personalities, young kids, whatever, who probably have, you know, an attitude, an opinion, you know, and Charlie Big Time comes in, and you can imagine there'll be respect before how he plays, but as a man or a manager, I'd be curious how they saw that, because, you know, he's not got managerial kind of pedigree. He's got a huge playing pedigree. So on the pitch, when he's stroking about and he's talking tactics, it's probably fine. But when he's doing this other stuff, I think they're probably looking at him saying, okay, yeah, we'll still to see whether what you're saying is right or not. And it's a psychological tool he's used. I mean, whether he's done it on purpose or whether he's just shooting off the hip, I don't know. Only he could answer. And probably if he answered now, I don't know if he would be able to answer in truth of what he felt at that time.
We're going to, whether it was next week or when you guys are back on in a couple of weeks, he'll make this mistake again, but there is evidence of learning, at least contained within this season, and we'll get to that. A real calamitous result that he plays the media card perfectly, and it is that evidence of what he needs to do now as the absolute figurehead of a club. And just a better appreciation for his role there, but that'll come in the next couple of weeks. John, I'll stay with you because I know you were there this night, this sliding doors moment, who knows, in the League Cup, East Fife. 0-0, Ali missed a penalty, Rangers finally go through on penalties. Gordon Marshall in goals for East Fife that night, unable to save any Rangers penalty, including an utterly dreadful one by Terry Butcher, who vowed immediately never to take a penalty again. Again, I know Rangers have had scares in this competition previously, but you just know the kind of people that would be sharpening their knives had Rangers with this revolution going out in methyl in August.
Yeah, I think there's one thing you got to. I mean, I think the advantage is it's away in terms of the support who are there, because the away support's always been different to the home support in terms of what it is, and there would be frustration, but you're less likely to get on the back of people or the team when you're away. Feel kind of familiar in terms of that. I mean, and that doesn't mean it's not nervous. It doesn't mean there isn't frustration. Missing that penalty late on when you think you're never going to score, you get a penalty and you think, okay, let's get this and get down across the road or whatever it was, because Methal's in the middle of nowhere. And suddenly it's going to penalties. And at that point, it is a shoot. But weirdly, it's one of these things, if you ask a Rangers fan, you'd say, we're not that great at penalties, but our record is generally pretty decent in penalty shootouts. It's not something that we tend to blow up too often, and in fact, more often than not, we do better than we should. There is one other aspect which, me personally, I didn't like people sharpening their pencils or whatever. But let me tell you, being shot at because you're the biggest team in town or the biggest name in town and there's huge expectations, it's a lot better than being laughed at and being ridiculed in the papers. And that has a huge impact.
See, on that, John, see, as a young boy, I used to read, the papers. I've got the library, read all the magazines. And Rangers weren't always, up to that point, the feature story. It would be... Aberdeen were in it a lot. Aberdeen would be the back page headline. Can you imagine that now? Any paper doing that would be commercial suicide. But sometimes you'd have to go 3-4 pages, Martyn, to get. I think it was one of the reasons why we lived in Ayrshire, but my dad got the Glasgow Evening Times, started getting it delivered every night, because at least you knew they would always get a Rangers story in it.
So you're just dismissed. More of an irrelevance.
So to suddenly go, as John says, as frustrating as it was, because it was quite clear a few of them wanted you to fail, but there was something in the paper every day. Now, some of it was outlandish bollocks. I remember coming home one night to a story in the Evening Times that Rangers were interested in Michel Platini. I'm sure we were. Everybody was, but there was no chance he was leaving Juventus to come to us. But some of it was patently bollocks, but it had gone up a great deal. I remember listening to that game on the radio, and the sense of excitement from the commentators was just enormous, because they thought that we were going to witness something really, really special. And God love my dad, because my dad's a very practical man, and my mum was, it's bedtime, and my dad's like, he's not going to his bed just now. And my mum went, no, he hasn't. He went, he'll not sleep anyway, so just let him stay up to the end of it. But I certainly wasn't sleeping after it, because my heart took about 2 days to get back to normal.
Okay, but Souness was worthy of that September Manager of the Month award, because there was a recovery from that difficult start in August. Some standard victories, I guess you would call them, certainly begin to call them. The 2 league away wins to Hamilton and Motherwell, a 4-0 hammering of Clydebank. That would become a bit of a pattern. Poor Clydebank that season. Robert Fleck with a hat-trick. Even the 1-1 draw at Tynecastle was... had merit at the start of October, because Rangers had quite a few missing that day, especially on the right hand side, and you've got this other piece of Cooper brilliance. This thing about the inconsistency, the drawbacks, the slips were silly. There were things you probably shouldn't expect, but the highs, it would appear to me, looking back, were exceptionally high. The first one we'll look at, of course, is in August. It's the first Old Firm game of the season, and it's on the telly.
Cooper. Good Durant with a chance, and he's done it! A brilliant goal by Durant. Superbly struck, brilliantly laid on by Davy Cooper. And if ever a team deserved a lead, it's Rangers. Only for a short period of Celtic got into the game. Look at that beautifully laid off ball. Durant, icily cool. The way he executed the finish. Rangers are in the lead, and about 16 minutes of the game left. The youngster took his time about it, didn't panic.
Okay, Rangers 1, Celtic 0 at Ibrox on 31st of August. The telly thing is important. This was broadcast live, the first Old Firm League game to be broadcast live. And the two clubs had to be twisted and pushed and cajoled into agreeing to this. John Payton, who was still the Rangers chairman at the time, even though Holmes was really pulling the strings, kind of admitted that television is not going away. so we have compromised. And that completely missing the point that TV could actually bring so many opportunities, as football would soon discover. David, were you there?
Yes, first Old Firm game.
Yeah, so you were both there, presumably. I did watch this on the telly. It was the first 90 minutes that I would have watched Rangers play, I'm pretty sure. Incredibly exciting. If Rangers had not scored, it would have been almost larceny. We really were the better team. How McCoy's missed some of those chances, I've no idea. The one that comes back off the post that he kind of sclaffs at. Durant should have had a penalty in the second half. But John, the goal, as I've said before and I've written before, is my favourite Rangers goal of all time. I think it is just beautiful. That graceful bit of play by Cooper, the reverse pass, Durant's tiny moment of just waiting for Bonner to commit himself before just rolling the ball in, and Ibrox looks wild. You two can fill me in on that or corroborate that. But I think more importantly, what I take from watching this game back is, and watching some of the games, the Old Firm games before from the previous season, the football is not wild. This is a different approach, a lot more patient. As soon as promised, this is a young midfield, remember, with Durant, Derek Ferguson, McMinn. Souness isn't playing, suspended, of course, after Easter Road. And that goal, I think, just typifies what seems to me just a completely different approach. Compare that with this cartoon chaos of the 4-4 in March '86, which I think is a vastly overrated game. This just has, all of a sudden, you're talking about maturity. This looks like a mature Rangers team. Where did it come from?
Go, David. You go first.
Yeah, I think that the occasion that day was such that there was a feeling of expectation around the place, but there wasn't fear that I could sense that was communicated from the support to the players. I think there was a sense of, right, come on, and it's that thing that we've spoken about before, about when a crowd and a team get in sync. But Rangers did avoid being dragged into too much hurly-burly. Celtic, to me, that season at times looked as though occasionally they would accept kicking and screaming, possibly, but they sort of accepted being the supporting actor. And this day felt like that a little bit, that the narrative was about Rangers and what would happen to Rangers. It wasn't about what Celtic were going to do on that day. And, obviously there's a lot of focus on us, but I think that there was just a sense from the Rangers players that if we played the right way, if we did the right things, but Derek Ferguson in centre midfield was absolutely terrific that day. That Derek Ferguson was why, for years, I was convinced it was this one in the League Cup final that sort of convinced me that he was going to be an absolute superstar. The problem, I think, is it might have convinced him that as well. But Rangers were just terrific. McMinn was, all energy, and we all know about Ted McMinn, that he could fall down, after beating 6 men, and it's true. But there was a lot more to him than that. He worked his direct opponent a lot, really hard. McCoy's was a wee bit too high strung. I think that miss that you mentioned, the one that comes back off the post, he snatches at it. It wasn't. I think he was a wee bit caught up in it. As for the goal itself, when you say that, I was in the enclosure. I was in the enclosure that day, and I didn't see the ball hit the net, but I knew it was a goal because when it went in, even though I didn't quite see, I saw Durant running through, and then I didn't see much because everybody sort of pushed by me. And then the next thing, I was up there, so I had a perfect view, and I realised my dad was trying to catch me, because it was guys running about, we're just hugging and throwing you up there and moving on to the next one. And it was this unbelievable bedlam, and I'd never heard a noise like it in my life before. It was like a sonic boom. It was an explosion. And it's the first time I've heard an Old Firm goal, and there wasn't long left, and Rangers are winning. And then, the singing was just going non-stop and everything. And I was trying to ask my dad to hold me up so I could give a V-sign to Celtic fans, and he wouldn't, because you've met my dad. He's far too nice and polite for that sort of unpleasantness. But it just, I do think that there's something in this, that I often got the sense that season that Celtic sort of allowed themselves to be not the protagonist of that season. It was the Rangers story. Now, I've got blue tinted specs on, but I do think, you'd see it in the papers and stuff. It was very much that we were to do things and their job was to stop us. It wasn't about what they would do. It was about whether or not they could foil us. It was like the plot of a movie. And I don't know whether it was just because we had this glamour and we had the guy who could carry him. We had the A-list star, if you like, and they didn't have that. But that day, I very much got the sense of they're just here as a sort of device plot, really, that they'll either beat us, in which case, they're the bad guys who spoil the party, or they're the foe that we vanquish. And like I say, I got that sense a lot. And one of the reasons I bring that up is, the following season, which was their centenary year, I got that sense that it was us that year, that we were the team who were only there as a protagonist in someone else's story. But I've got a really strong sense of feeling that at that point, that Celtic weren't viewed, not just by us, but in general, maybe even by their own fans, as a team who were out to try and stop someone else doing something rather than going and achieving it for themselves.
John, how important was this?
It was. To be fair, at this point, we have no fear of them at Ibrox. I mean, if you're back again since Wallace started, with a fairly decent record playing them. I mean, I think this was the best we played in an Old Firm game all that season, including the New Year's Day one. I thought we were fantastic that day. All we needed was a goal, and it did have a look of a 0-0 or them scoring a late goal. After doing similarly with sort of Dundee United, play teams off the park. And there is a kind of degree, I think, around the hour mark where there is this, here we go again. But it's hugely important. I mean, the weird thing, and again, everything as David said, because that is the emotional play out in the press. The reality is, and I was stunned when I was looking at this before, Celtic are in sensational form.
Yeah.
From March to November, the only team in Scotland who can beat them is us. And they start off this season. At one point, Bonner's going for the world record for the shutouts, 883 minutes or something he's got for, at the beginning of the season, including friendlies.
My God, can you imagine if that guy, of all goalkeepers...
Yeah. Well, you look at that defence. I mean, they don't have defence. I mean, we'll get to the League Cup final, I'm sure. You look at that the League Cup final is the most Timish of Tim teams. It is not pragmatism at all. And you're looking at it and you say, but actually, you look back and you see where they are. This is a game we had to win.
Yeah.
They could afford to lose this game. And that is always huge. The manner of how we played it, and I was must be really close today because I was in the enclosure when McMinnon or Durant jumps in McMinnon, it's right in front of me. I'm sort of 2/3 of the way back, just under where the stand finishes. And it is bedlam, but I've been in the enclosure quite a few times. They're the governor. I hate going to the Copeland to watch us play them because that is always a disaster. So I just don't go there. So I hate that. But it was absolute mayhem, and it just was Celtic. But it was having played so well and winning. I think if we'd have played and got 1-1 or 0-0, wouldn't it be an issue? If we hadn't won this, given the way that we absolutely destroyed them, that would have been a huge problem, I think. But then winning it, and yeah, I mean, the only thing I remember about their support that day was they were chanting Argentina.
Just as Woods launches the ball up for the goal.
And yeah, I mean, the other stunning thing, you don't get to think which I forgot about this is how much Cammy Fraser plays in this early part.
Yeah,
I always thought Cammy Fraser was his replacement. But actually, okay, Souness isn't there. But he plays a lot until he gets injured in this early part of the season. He's almost like Souness is Ryan Jack.
Yeah.
It's really weird because I always thought he was a bit part player, and it's only when Souness got injured, suspended, that he came in, and it was Souness plus Durrant and Ferguson, because they were potentially two generational stars, I would say.
They were.
I mean, they were, whatever happened to Derek Ferguson, he's going, and we know what happened to Durrant injury-wise. But these guys were on another planet, and they were just coming through, and I always thought it was Souness guiding it. But Cammy Fraser really does play a lot in this early part of the season and plays well. And he's not a guy who's loved by, I would argue, the players, and certainly not by the fans.
No, but I noticed that early, that people around about me just didn't like him, and I found that, as I say, a little odd, because my wee boy, I love all Rangers fans, Rangers players, but people were like, nah, he's shite, he's useless, he thinks he's better than he is. That was a kind of common one that you heard a lot. But you're right, and again, seeing the cup final, he's absolutely terrific. But there are some guys that I don't know if it's just a memory thing in time, John, and whether you do it, but guys that you don't think of at all as this era, and Ali Dawson's one. I think the Dougie Bell's another. Names that'll pop up this season that I thought they all left in the summer. I thought they were John McDonald's, and they're not. They're still, which again shows you that the idea of the utterly radical surgery done on this team in the summer isn't true.
It was one of the biggest myths about this particular season. I mean, I just thinking, or just speaking about that goal, the Durrant goal there. I mean, David, you know me very well. I'm not an overly emotional guy,
you're not.
But I struggle to talk about that goal without being emotional, and I've always wondered why. It is beautiful, and of course Cooper and Durrant, there's obviously more than a hint of tragedy about their careers and lives, and real kind of true blue Rangers heroes and whatever. But I think it's the telly, I think it's the fact that is my first experience of watching Rangers. I think certainly 90 minutes I would have seen highlights or whatever, but that being in the moment as it's happening, beating Celtic, sitting on the couch with my old man, I'm only 5. It must be that, and telly's obviously going to be a big part of this series, this particular story, because it does shape football. Okay, let's move on. The Skull League Cup.
Can I just say I'm with John Payton on the telly, because I hate Old Firm games on a Sunday, because if you lose, you've only got 12 hours before you have to face and work traditionally, and if you win, it's a Sunday night.
Yeah, that was always my thing about it, that if it was a Sunday, one, I would be hungover, right? So that's not great. And two, as you say, after it, the amount of Monday clubs I joined, John, after Old Firm games, good, generally actually in a worse state if we lost, because then you really need to go in the bevy. I think the adrenaline of a win keeps you sober. But look, Mark, you're right, it was huge, because being on the telly, it's a new dawn. That's what everything sort of felt like to people our age. The thing was new, the possibilities were here. We were signing guys from England, which we talked about in the first show. We had Graeme Souness as a manager. We had this crop of young, cool. That was the other thing. There's huge identification. People my age, we loved Ian Durrant, we loved Ali McCoist. They were like us.
Yeah.
In a way that clearly couldn't be there when the Advocate era glamour. It just felt like this is all new, and an Old Firm game on the telly, live and experts, and it was just a different world.
The world was changing. The Skull League Cup then, a source of refuge in the early 80s, of course, for Rangers. The East Fife scare is over. Rangers beat Dundee as well, 3-1. Final sales at Hampden for the semi-final. Bit of pressure. This game happens, of course, on the Wednesday evening, midweek. The previous weekend was that defeat at Dens Park in the league. So we have this on the 24th of September to face Dundee United, of course, who have beaten us already at Ibrox. They are in good form. Celtic are already in the final. They played in the previous night, beat Motherwell on penalty kicks. So, bit of pressure. Looking back, I would have assumed, John, you contest that, because it's Dundee United, it's Hampden, and there's some very good recent memories of that. Rangers win 2-1. Ted McMinn, Ali McCoist making the difference. Dundee United do pull one back through former Rangers player Ian Ferguson, but this time Rangers hold out. There is no capitulation. Again, what comes through to me, David, you've mentioned it just there. Alan and Andy and I discussed it at length last week. It's the current Rangers players, or the players who were already in situ, that are stepping up in these early big wins and these big performances. And it's the influence of this small band of quality, of course, that's quite evident, because it's McMinn and McCoist here, of course. John, you this was never in doubt for you then?
Look, long term, I am always super confident. Short term, of course, on the day of the game here, but Dundee United don't win at Hampden against us. They just don't at this point. They have a huge mental block. It's not that we can beat them, it's that they can't beat us. They just are. They're beat before they go on the pitch. Until they change their manager and we get Maxwell and McPherson. They can't beat us. And that allied to, he hates the word and I hate it, we know how to win at Hampden. I mean, we very rarely get beaten. We talked last week about when Aberdeen beat us in the 2 Cup. Both times against an ageing, dreadful team, it goes to extra time. We are very comfortable at Hampden. All the way going back to the mid-70s, we know what we've got to do. We very rarely lose there. And Dundee United can't beat us. Generally, in fact, the worst thing they could have done was beat us at Ibrox, because that's their low averages. That's their second win in 15 games. There is also the previous weekend where you get beat at Dundee, and that's got a kind of familiarity, and you're going to get a reaction from this Rangers team. I mean, already there is that when the chips are down and you need to win, a la the Old Firm game, and you need to, and after that, you'll get a reaction. And therefore, the odds are you don't see how we're not going to win that night. Yeah, because it's also the League Cup. I mean, it's our thing, and we can talk about Butcher and all that, but I mean, you get so many players through that team who have played in League Cups and made huge contributions in it, that actually and I think Ali loves scoring against Dundee United, is he about 7 games in a row or something. I mean, can't play against Aberdeen. I mean, we'll probably come on to that next. Aberdeen is the big psychological. Celtic at Ibrox and Dundee United at Hampden aren't big psychological barriers for this team. It's not like when Ryan Jack scored the 1-0 against Rodgers' Celtic, where you hadn't beat them forever. We know how to beat Celtic at Ibrox. We know how to beat Dundee United at Hampden. And Dundee United, I think they beat the Tims 1. They can't win at Hampden. I mean, their 2 League Cup finals wins are at Dens Park. They cannot win at Hampden. It is now a thing of epic proportions. And it's, 2-0, you lose a goal. But actually, weirdly, because of the way what happened at Ibrox, we've lived and learned. And, it's a learning process for this team. And that's my impression of it. It's not a surprise when you look back.
I shat myself at 2-1 though, because I'm 8, and therefore, having seen it a few weeks before, I'm like, oh no, not again, not tonight, not with the cup final. It felt like a good win when we did it, and there's some really good football by Rangers in that first half in particular. And then, of course, we were the first night and Celtic were the second, and they had Motherwell, where I'm pretty sure actually Motherwell scored
I think they were first.
Breezer.
I think the Tims were in it. I think they were Tuesday night, we were the Wednesday. They went through in
either way, I remember watching their game, and I probably got my nights mixed up, but I remember watching their game and thinking, we would beat them here, big pitch. We're a good side, because I'm listening to all this stuff on the radio about pass inside and whatnot. I'm a wee boy, I'm like a sponge, last person I've spoke to. So I'm thinking, big pitch, we'll run them into the ground and all that kind of stuff, So, but my confidence, Martyn, was to ebb and flow before the actual match itself, and then was to ebb and flow during the cup final.
Yeah. Well, we're through to the final. Big week this in September. I'm getting through to that final soon as it's first, of course. But on the Saturday, we play Aberdeen at Ibrox. Now, Aberdeen, I think it's fair to say, John, do not have the same fear about coming to Glasgow to play Rangers at that time. The game was titled Souness's Revenge. That's how it was billed, reference to Alex Ferguson's decision to drop him for that Uruguay game at the World Cup in Mexico. They were expecting a fair bit of spice and needle, considering some of the things that we've seen already in this season, but it wasn't. A very good, very enjoyable game of football, and Rangers were impressive creatively, but also, maybe more importantly, were impressive at the back. Butcher really starting to come into his own as a defensive leader, had to withstand a fair bit of pressure, especially in that second half, and of course the boss himself started the scoring.
McMinn. Still Ted McMinn, this Souness. It's over the line. The goal's been given. A superb goal from Graeme Souness. There's Weir flighting it across, too high for Dodds. Cooper's missed kick, but McCoist has it for Rangers. He has Fleck on his right. Fleck is onside, the chance to clinch it for Rangers. McCoist makes it 2.
My first game, David and John, as I'm sure you both know. Very, very excited by this Rangers win 2-0. That Souness celebration, power and poise and just arrogance. The second goal, more a matter of hilarity because of Leighton's antics. I think he was at the touchline to see the linesman before Robert Fleck had even rolled it in. As a historian and trying to make a narrative, this seems very symbolic, this win. The new guard against the old. Souness and Ferguson were interviewed at the same time by STV after the game.
I know.
I think it was done deliberately, again, to kind of put this Mexico feud kind of to bed. But I think both men are, very obviously at different positions in their life. Ferguson, I say, uncharacteristically phlegmatic about losing to Rangers, losing at Ibrox, to a second goal that potentially controversial for offside. I can imagine maybe 2 or 3 years before he would not be as relaxed. He looks like a man that's waiting for another call, which of course would come very, very quickly. Souness, club blazer on, open collar, satisfied, but there's still an edge to him. He's still, I think, impatient. Big win, big result, but we want more. David, am I romanticising the symbolic importance of this game because it's individual for me? But yeah.
Well, you would be allowed to because it's a game that counts towards that. But I don't think you are, no, because it did feel pivotal. And again, I go back to what we said in the first show about where Aberdeen were viewed, and John had mentioned, how much the Rangers crowd hated them. And because Aberdeen, when they became top dogs, and although it's just a blip of time in the whole history of Scottish football, it was 5-6 years at this point, right? So it's no feeling like a blip in time. It's all I've known that Aberdeen are the best team. And they carried themselves, with a Ferguson-like, it's not enough for us to win, someone has to lose attitude. And they carried themselves like they were better than us. And because a lot of it had been based on him having a chip on his shoulder about, the old firm, that they did rub your nose in it. They did make sure you knew all about it. And like I say, at the time, they could afford some decent players as well. And in the papers, there would be an Aberdeen story just about every day. It was not like it is now, and not like it would be, really from about the mid-90s. So it was a huge game. Also, that they had given us some fearful beatings at Ibrox in the past, and they were always very confident. But I think both teams knew, both managers through the week sort of did the whole, well, it won't decide the season, it's a huge game stuff, which you would expect. But the fact that they were asked that tells you it was a huge game. The fact that was brought up suggests how big a game it was. And it was pretty clear Aberdeen wanted to come down. I still remember, listening to the radio on the way up and on BBC Scotland, them saying, that Aberdeen will want to just let everybody know, because, as was pointed out, they didn't win the league last season, Aberdeen. So although they'd won the cups, both cups, the previous season, that they, as I say, they hadn't won the league, and they just wanted to remind everybody, that they were the best team in Scotland and to get their title back. And I think there was a real sense that they would come down and just show everybody, don't you forget about us. Remember who has been the team of the decade so far. And from a Rangers point of view, though, there was expectation. I would say that again. I probably sensed more nervousness from people around me than I did even for that Old Firm match, because just the way things had been for the last few seasons. But immediately, you could see that it was going to be a very competitive game. But there were winners on that pitch on both sides, and both of them were determined not to give an inch to the opposition. And of course, we take the lead from that Souness free kick. And again, I remember being annoying my dad by going, "Why don't more players do that, where you kick it into the wall and it deflects in?" And him having to patiently explain to me that he didn't mean that to happen. It was a wee bit of luck, but I thought he'd meant it, because, as I said to you earlier, I thought Graeme Souness was God at this point. So he meant it. But then that second goal, I just remember being absolutely, people are going nuts, but I remember being absolutely spellbound by that was the first I had ever seen Jim Leighton 800 metres runner. And thankfully for my laughter channels, it would not be the last that I would see that. But there was, people were dancing and singing in the last few minutes of that game. And when it went, there was, honest to God, an Old Firm style cheer, because it just felt like, and I know that, as I say, for me, I felt this was huge, because we had beaten Celtic a fair bit in the last few years, never led to anything, but it wasn't like it was. Do you remember when was that 3-0 game at Ibrox, John? Would that be 84? 85.
So, it was the same season as the 4 each, so that's what I'm saying. But then we'd won 3-0, 4 each, 3-2, and then we beat them. We were in a good run against them. It wasn't huge.
It wasn't, I mean, always brilliant, and you didn't want to lose. But Aberdeen, no, we lost to Aberdeen, and sometimes quite heavily. And I think it was also saying to Aberdeen that this has finished. You've had your moment in the sun, and of course, as we sit here now in 2022, we can absolutely say that their glory days. There were maybe a few aftershocks, but the earthquake was well over at this stage. So no, I don't think you can romanticise it. And as crazy as it might sound to younger people who've grown up, and their children will grow up in a world where it's Rangers or Celtic, and that's your dinner. In many ways, to me, at 8 years of age, I would have considered this the bigger of the two victories.
John, you go with that?
Of all the games we're talking about in this programme, this is the biggest victory by far. I think Souness, you can't say it's luck, but it is. Playing Celtic at Ibrox and then Aberdeen at Ibrox is a huge advantage. But Aberdeen is our psychological block.
Yeah.
From 82 to 85, they are the top team in Scotland. Actually, they begin to go downhill after 85. You can only say that afterwards, because it could have been a blip tiredness. But this is huge, and it's also huge with the second goal, because McCoist at this point is almost like Ian Runch against Man U. He can score against everybody, but I think this is his first goal against Aberdeen when he rolls that one in. When Fleck squares it back to him. And again, it's a huge thing. I mean, because Ali, despite what Andy might have said last week, Ali carried us the year before. I mean, no Ali goals. We were, never mind Europe, we were in relegation trouble. But he could never score. He could never get the better of McLeish and Miller, who were phenomenal. And to be able to do this and do it 2-0 is a good score. It's not a 1-0. Could they? And yeah, it's the biggest game, because this is our big psychological block in this thing. We cannot beat Aberdeen for love nor money. We didn't under Wallace. Can't remember the last time we did it under Greg. But nothing each draws are fantastic. How well we've played. But this is the one that sends. And it's not because Aberdeen are the best team. Celtic are are the team, and Dundee United at the top. Aberdeen aren't that great at this point in terms of performance.
He's looking away at this point, isn't he, John Ferguson? We don't know that at this time, but aye.
Yeah, I mean, he's given up in this team and I think he sees that he's lost, because whilst we're signing from England, he's losing to England. So he's lost Strachan, Cooper, Black's gone to Metz, is it? Or he's gone to France. So he's beginning to lose it. And he does say later that he overplayed his younger players. I think Simpson's out that season. But yeah, he's obviously had a look and went, he's never going to be able to spend money. You talked last week about, Scottish football is paralysed. I think there's two things. I'm not sure they were paralysed. One is nobody can compete because the Tims are never going to do it. And who's going to attract a top calibre, international quality to Tannadice or Pittodrie? And the second one is there's a degree of complacency, because we're a circus act. And even when all the facts are there, the muscle memory is Rangers are a disaster. And actually, Rangers, when they spend big, it never works, a la late 60s, early 70s into 80s, which we spent big in relative terms. We tend to cock it up because actually we don't have any youth coming through to balance it out. So we're not taken seriously that summer, I don't think, because everybody is expecting the Hibs game. And I think the Hibs game reinforces a lot of, they've spent big, but they'll never be able to hand it. That kind of, you still get it a bit. That's kind of Scottish mentality of we're different. Just because you're a world-class player and you were playing against Maradona and all of this doesn't mean you can hack it against Stevie Cowan and, sensational stars like that. But beating Aberdeen is huge for us. I mean, psychologically, on every level. And I think all these games are actually helping tie Butcher right into us. Because you said last week you might have had some doubts. Souness, I don't think ever really gets us or ever wants to. He's he's a middle class Edinburgh guy. Butcher is one of the guys. I mean, we had him at the supporters club in the February. He wants to be sinking pints. He loves the adulation, the atmosphere. And all of these games, he's looking about and obviously going to England games and saying, God, you boys want to come up here and see what's happening. Yeah. This is unbelievable.
Well, we're going to get to one of those big games, I imagine, because Souness at the end, as I said, just seems impatient, wants success, tangible success, silverware. And on the 26th of October, he would get it.
And Cammy Fraser is there. Butcher's there. Durant is there and scores. Durant has scored for Rangers. 1-0 with exactly 17 minutes gone. Well, the very boy we were just talking about there takes his chance. Only a half chance. Touched by Terry Butcher. Went to the outside and the near side of the goalkeeper. Bit of discussing going on. There's a chip forward and it's off the bar. And it's a brilliant save by the Rangers goalkeeper. Superb save. Edison, a brilliant equaliser. On to McMinn. Durant. That's a crossover. And I think the goalkeeper... No. Just for a moment I thought Celtic were getting a free kick out of that. Ferguson. To Cooper. Free kick.
We definitely lack in the game enough players to take the ball to opposing defenders.
Feels for a penalty kick there. It's a given. It's a penalty to Rangers. And there's going to be bother for a Celtic player. I don't know which one it is. There it is again. A vital moment in this game. I make it 5.5 minutes remaining of the Skull Cup final. 2-1. Done with the greatest simplicity. And there goes the final whistle. Rangers have won the Skol League Cup final. Rangers supporters erupt. And there is Terry Butcher, the first Englishman to hold that League Cup trophy aloft. And he'll do it right now.
Okay, Rangers 2, Celtic 1 in that Skol League Cup final. First trophy in the bag. There's so much in here, gents. We need to be careful with time. Both parties, I guess, get what they want. Celtic have their gripe, which they never knowingly miss an opportunity to wallow in paranoia, with Davy Symes, to be fair, dreadful handling of the conclusion to this game, the sending off of Maurice Johnson. Even though he had been booked already, he would have to walk. It was quite an incredible bit of circus nonsense at the end there. And the football was decent in parts. It was a wee bit more harem-scarum than the Ibrox League game. Celtic probably the better team, and certainly at the time, or at a time in the second half, Rangers, and certainly that young midfield starting to just be swamped a little bit. But they kept kicking Davy Cooper, and they kept bringing him down and giving Rangers free kicks around the area, which of course the second goal came from. The first one came from a corner. In fact, I think it came from a free kick down there actually. And you know that first trophy is in the bag. Celtic, Davy Hay took the ball, didn't he? Directly off the pitch, and wanted to go down the road, and he literally said to the press, like, Celtic should go to play in England now. So it kind of had everything, John. And I know, you've had a 3-2 victory, 3 seasons before, in the same final with Ali's hat-trick and all that. But I guess this was important because of what you've just said, this kind of expectation, the money, the fanfare. This is big, surely.
It's big. Yeah. I always think in hindsight, or thinking after 8 years, it was bigger for the manager than it was for the players. It was certainly huge for the club. But most of the players in that pitch have more than one League Cup winners' medals in that, and have had some magnificent times. Hampden's different now. I mean, what was it? 74,000 was there, and I was the Rangers section Jai, whatever you want to call it. My English sons hate me saying Jai, but it's Scottish. And it's phenomenal, the atmosphere, and it is one of those old firm games which kind of ebbs and flows, and it's a kind of typical one. You can look back and say, well, you knew you were going to win. Of course we didn't, because we win the League Cup and they win the Scottish Cup finals when it's Old Firm. And that's been the kind of way. It is around that sort of late 60s through to then. But these are draining occasions. Standing, the sway of the crowd. I mean, 2 goals is absolutely exhausting. And all the abuse you're given. I mean, it has everything in its mayhem. And when you've won, it is just absolutely phenomenal. Thinking about what's coming next, you are living in that moment. And I think that's where a lot of us, not you younger guys, who'd seen it, 60s, older guys and me, 70s, and had really missed it of being top dogs. And you get to this and you win an Old Firm Cup final and people are looking at you and taking it seriously. And the adrenaline rush of late penalties, the whole, and Mojo is a circus. He's an absolute circus. We wouldn't go into the long sleeves that only he seems to wear, and the rumours surrounding that. But yeah, I mean, it's absolute mayhem, and it's wonderful. I mean, I know people talk about, the singing. It doesn't mean anything, but the adrenaline rush is fantastic. I can remember Sunday again, bloody hell, pub shut. I don't drink, but you want to be in the pub talking about it, and we ended up driving up the town to get the daily record at Central Station at midnight.
Those
And
days, eh?
the front page of the Daily Record has got a blue hue on it. It's not white. It's got the whole print, but the print is in blue. I don't know it's black, but it's got a blue background. You can look at it at the Celtic Wiki. And the other fantastic thing that Charlie found out is on the 2nd of October, Davy Hay sets out a new disciplinary code to Celtic players, at which one of them is a ban on blessing themselves in public. And he says as a quote, for instance, if one of our players was to bless himself at some critical stage of the Scotland League Cup final against Rangers later this month, it could cause a riot. How prophetic is that?
Yeah, Celtic had played Dundee United earlier that season. They were 2 up at Tannadice, and they surrendered that lead and got ended 2-2. And Hay had requested that Valentine never referee another game involving Celtic. It's there. That tension's there. David, presumably you watched this on the telly as I did.
I did. Andy Gray was with an incredible jumper. Yes.
Yes. With Dougie Donnelly in a caravan outside the main stand at Hampden.
Bizarrely they had them. Yeah, they had them in this static caravan.
It was just. It's nascent though. This is it's new. There's 2 images from that televised final that still stick with me. Cooper hoisted above by Durant. Again, these 2. I'll say it again, these 2 just true blue kind of Rangers heroes. Cooper just cool. Durant said it's almost unfair that Cooper was allowed to take penalties because he was just that reliable. But the Bears going utterly mental in the background, and Cooper just that arm raised, and then Souness at full time, just looking up to Holmes. In the director's box. Souness, of course, not suspended to this one, injured. So he has the suit on, but just raising his fist. Not overly done, not going wild, but there's just this calm assurance that someone's in control of this club at last. Very powerful, I think. I appreciate what you're saying that some of the other victories earlier in this period, probably more important for the season. But there's obviously something magical about winning cups. That the weekend that the clocks change, just it's under lights. It's against Celtic. It's Souness's first, if you don't count the Glasgow Cup, obviously. But this was, the imagery is iconic, I think, David.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a few things that you mentioned there that I find very evocative. First thing is that darkness. It was that super all-enveloping winter darkness. And the Scotland Cup final always told you were into winter, I think,
Yes.
as a wee boy. My birthday's in November and then Christmas, so maybe that's a reason I've got such fond memories of the Scotland Cup, because 1, we always won it, and 2, these series of amazing finals in the late 80s that we would contest. The other bits that I remember very specifically are not only his jumper, but I remember my mad Uncle Jim sitting watching the game with us, and he went, "Is Davy Hay just came off a fucking shift at Arnold Clark's or something?" Because he is dressed as a car salesman. He's wearing a mustard
like a bus driver.
jumper.
It's Angelos
Epithemium. He's got like a brown sort of winter coat that you would get in TG Hughes, for 25 quid Farah special. And Souness looks like $1 million, suit and tie, club suit, just looks brilliant. And Davy Hay, as I say, has come dressed after selling a used Audi. And then the actual game, I remember the banners before it. Terry's All Gold was one in the Rangers. Celtic had the worst banner I've ever seen, which said Roy Aitken is a tin man can opener. And I was like, oh, that's bad. I'm 8 and I know that's bad. Right? That's how bad that is. To the game itself, Rangers, we did this as a watch along. It's there, folks, if you want to go do it. We watched it with young James, who obviously wasn't around in those days. And he said the thing that stunned him was this game would finish with 4 players each, because the amount of tackles that are going in, that these days there would be questions in Parliament about, right? On both sides, by the way.
McCoy's is an absolute beezer near the end.
Man alive, they are just kicking the shit out of each other. Men in those days, man. And it was, Rangers first half were excellent. Cammy Fraser with, honestly, it must be 35 yards minimum effort hits the post with from a free kick. I mean, a real terrific hit. John's right when he said draining. I remember this game lasting for hours into the second half, and the surge, and then sort of, I think Rangers getting a bit on top. We get that free kick, the delivery, and the finish from Durant. It's knowing what he wants to do. It's that football brain. Take it in the chest, but he's not chesting it because the ball's come at him and his chest is nearest. He goes, while the ball's in the air, he thinks, if I chest that down there and then adjust my body, I'll have a shot. He takes it into the perfect position and then, of course, explodes it past the goalkeeper. Celtic's equaliser is a beauty as well, in all fairness. Slick 1-2 between McLaren and Johnston, and then right into the top corner. And at that stage, you're right, they're beginning to get a wee bit ahead. It's a penalty. Roy Aitken, of course, going through his impression, but watch it. He's not looking at the ball. He's got two hands on Butcher and he hauls him down right in front of the referee. It was a penalty kick. I'm always nervous, as we all are, when somebody's taking a penalty, but I knew he would score. I'd seen Davy Cooper hit a penalty before, actually, in a big important game for Scotland against Wales. So I just knew that he would tuck it away. Of course he does. And then, that brilliant where he just stands there and gets lifted aloft, the coolest man in the whole stadium.
Can either of you two lip read the 8-year-old, I've got to ask?
I was made aware of what he had said by the older gentleman in the room. It was a source of much mirth, John. Shall we put it that way? But then you're counting down the minutes. But I never really felt that they were going to score, and of course we're going to win it. And then you're right. It's the look up, and the camera catches it just perfectly. Yeah. And I agree with John. John made a really interesting point there, something I hadn't considered till he said it, but he's right. It was more important for Souness than it was for the players because they had won League Cups before, but he needed it because now he's already saying, look, I think he needs it for himself because it's like, I'm starting to pay back. I've won a cup, right? I was a winner as a player. Now already I'm a winner as a manager and I'm starting to pay back. And there's always this parallel that people draw between Souness and Gerrard, and I get that. And Gerrard's records in cups, of course, was really poor. But at that point, it was, it wasn't, we weren't as a success starved, yes, for a title, but we had won cups, whereas with Gerrard we'd won nothing at all. So, and we needed that league title, we knew that. But the fans, I think, would have coped with all. It wouldn't have led to a series of this isn't going to work. I honestly don't believe that. He's got the Old Firm victories in the bag. I think John will know better than me. I think that the people would have said it's a cup final, it can happen. But the fact that we'd won it, because then you can start to, again, really feed into he's a winner. This is what he does. He's going to succeed because look here, already look at what he's achieved here with this side, and it's only going to get better. But 2 wins, in that short space of time against them, a win against Aberdeen, and it's quite clear already that we're a completely different beast, that we are now a side who are more than capable of going on and winning the title. But I don't think then that anybody ever thought, well, that means now, look at us, it's now just going to be shooting into the title. You're coming off a season where Hearts had gone, I think, something like 31 games undefeated and lost the league, in the last day of the season. So there was the understanding that it's still going to be a slog. It's a long, long way away. But yeah, I mean, the fact that you've already kind of got rid of he's never won any as a manager thing at that stage of the season. What I also think was important is I heard Terry Butcher at a speakers night one night, years later, say that a lot of the boys down south watched that game because they showed it down south, and he said they were getting in touch with him in the next few days, and at the next England get together, and they went, that looked amazing. And he said, and I'm saying to him, like, come up and play. He said, you've never experienced anything like it, as you said, 75,000 people, huge games all the time, Europe. These things are important. They might not have a payoff the next day, but these things are important. People are looking at this and going, God, the big man's enjoying himself, isn't he? And I'm stuck in. And you do need to remember how grim the season was in England that year. It really was a depressing place to play football. These half-empty stadiums with the cages and the violence and no European football. And really down there, it was kind of like the ugly, shunned stepchild at that point. And he's saying to them, "Oh, I'm having the time of my life up here, 3 hours up the road." So I just think it was a really important victory, obviously, as any cup final in Celtic are. But I don't think you can use it as that was the launch pad. I think we were already in the air at that point.
I think this is the night going on about Butcher. This is the night where they have the party back at Ibrox, and they're all going to Panama Jack's or whatever, and he's walking out the door, and Souness stops him and takes a League Cup off him because he's about to take up Henry after the kids are Panama. I mean, and if you talk, as David says, it, he's going to speak to England. The guys are saying, and I mean, this is just like playing for Rangers. You might argue for them if they win, but playing for Rangers is such a joy. European games, decent, playing at a decent level, big games. The noise is going on about Ibrox, but that one is just phenomenal, and it just puts it in perspective. I don't think we're any different to any other season. In fact, I look back 84, 85 and 85, 86. We are in a position where we have always been. The thing is, we always fold in previous years. What happens is always true for Rangers is what do you do from December through to March? And that defines your season. Always.
It almost always does. A small point on that party. I think every employee of the club, which relative to today would be a small group, was present, or at least invited to that after cup final party. And there was just this family sense that David Holmes was introducing to the club. Players talk about it. Campbell Ogilvie talks about it. That everyone was buying into this thing, and they absolutely recognised that at the time. Games were becoming all ticket, which was relatively new. Even the AGM, which not really something touts would get a lot of money for before, was a bit of a shambles, wasn't it? People couldn't get in and had to be rescheduled for the exhibition centre.
It was fantastic that the AGM rescheduled because it was right after the League Cup final.
Yeah, they had it.
And I got to hold the League Cup. This is the lack of commercialisation, because after it was a whole load of nonsense, and I had 5 shares or whatever. But as you went out, the League Cup was on the table, and the guys in front of me were queuing up. And one of them lifted up, and the security guy didn't move. Yeah. So after that, everybody was imagining himself as Big Terry, lift it, and it's a huge trophy. Wow. It's a magnificent trophy. It's really heavy. But it just was, we were in a row. I mean, I think, you talk about that League Cup final and the tackles, that gets the crowd going. Souness said it many times. If it's not going well, make a tackle, get the crowd up. And it's just pure emotion at that point. We're up and down. It's a roller coaster, but roller coasters tend to be quite good fun as long as you don't, crash at the end of it.
Gone to the time. Again, you're looking at that right. You're saying we're on a roll, and everyone's buying into just about everything in the club. Literally, the cup's in the bag. Surely, Souness is going to get that kind of much sought after consistency. Well, not quite. A couple of draws, although one would say credible ones, up at Tannadice 0-0, one each at Parkhead just a couple of weeks after that cup final. Wee bit more a sedate affair. But then again, this step backwards at Ibrox, 8th of November against Motherwell. Rangers just knocking on the door all day, not getting anywhere, and Motherwell 88th minute winner. And I guess just this kind of blunt reminder of how toothless Rangers maybe had been before. It could still happen again. Again, it's Walter Smith that's wheeled out to do the post-match. And he said, the lack of full-back support and getting around that kind of Motherwell rearguard before saying, somewhat tantalisingly, it's something we will sort out. Thankfully, Clydebank and show. Rangers battered them. A 2-1 victory over Dundee. Another late goal. Dave McPherson getting it. And Souness, having to reiterate again that fans as well as players are just going to have to be patient. We will not resort to swinging the high ball into the area in frustration. We will continue to play it from the back, and even if it takes 80 minutes to crack a defence, then that is the way it will have to be. Pittodrie is still an issue. We lose 1-0 up there, and Dave McPherson to a straight red card. He absolutely somehow made Davy Dodds even uglier than he was at kick-off. He spread his nose pretty much all over his face. And that bus journey home, Rangers are 8 points behind Celtic, 2 points for a win. The next time they would take that trip to Pittodrie would be a very different affair. One game I want to touch on before we wrap up, boys, and just the first leg. UEFA Cup still there. Tampere were seen off a creditable win over Boa Vista as well. Derek Ferguson getting the only goal in Portugal after a first leg 2-1 win at Ibrox. That led us to meeting German opposition, which would be a bit of a theme over these soonish years. Borussia Mönchengladbach, managed by Jupp Heynckes, who had quite a decent career, I think. This was his final season before going to Bayern. And that game at Ibrox then, boys, Rangers start very well. Ian Durrant is the man who puts Rangers in front again. Very bright 15 minutes, but self-inflicted wound again, John. Derek Ferguson, loose pass out of defence, German spring a counter. Monroe is stripped, I think, by Winkle before Uwe Ran converts the cross to make it 1-1. Really annoying away goal, of course, and it finishes that way. Your memories of that night?
Disappointment. I genuinely believed, and there aren't many, I think, the advocate early on, there are seasons where you could go deep into Europe, and you just thought the way we were playing was probably more suited for Europe, a la Liverpool, than Scotland in many ways. And yeah, I mean, the goal just before, and I think it took everything out of us, actually. Disappointment. It was one of the lower ones of that season. I mean, at that point, I mean, the Motherwell game you touched on, was that not the beginning of the quintessential games against Tommy McLean's Motherwell?
Oh, that was a hellish game that day. It's amazing. It's amazing the names you remember. Ray Farningham and his moustache scoring the winner that day. That was a week. That was one of the early weekend ruiners for me because it was raining and a miserable day. Couldn't even go and play when I got home.
Okay, gents.
It was really disappointing, but it reinforced the rule of Rangers against German opposition. We only beat teams that come from towns that begin with D, or if we beat Bayern, we win the European trophy.
Do you know the funny thing about it, Martyn, is that back then there was this. I think it took British clubs so long to understand how to use an away goal.
Yeah.
No, I genuinely do, John. I think that you would hear British teams all the time saying, we're going to go over there, try and keep a clean sheet, and if it's a 0-0, that'd be a great result. No, it wouldn't. Hello. And it took decades to sink in. So, of course, the Germans get the goal. We get one 15 minutes, I think, Ian Durrant, and then they get their goal bang on half time, and then they just sit in and they're like, yeah, this will absolutely do this because then you'll need to come out in the second leg. And we just, not just Rangers, but British teams in general. And it's a wee bit frustrating to me because one of the few teams who did understand it were Liverpool. I remember the year they won the Champions League. They drew 0-0, won the Champions League, won the European Cup the last time, which would be 84. They drew 0-0 with Dinamo Tbilisi at home. And Joe Fagan said, no, we're still favourites because we'll score out there. Yeah. And people in Britain laughed and went, no, you got the sacred 0-0. That means that they've got their 0-0, you're out. And of course, that's exactly what they did do. They went over there and scored and then hit them in the break and done them. And I kind of, looking back, didn't think at the time as a wee boy, but looking back, I kind of am a wee bit disappointed. Souness didn't realise that because he was at the one club in Britain that seemed to understand how to use this thing to your advantage. But I don't think British clubs caught up. I think we thought it was somehow sneaky and unsporting.
It's a bit like Celtic supporters think that if you've got a goalkeeper that saves shots, that's cheating. I mean,
Yeah,
in that
yeah,
direction.
it's exactly that. It's like, well, these Europeans might get their goal and then sit in and defend, but we don't do that. We just treat them as two games, and whoever scores the most goals over the two of them wins. And your European clubs were light years ahead of us.
Well, we'll have plenty of European action to discuss over the next months ahead, but it's been another enjoyable discussion, gentlemen. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Glad we managed to cut it short for you tonight.
Yeah, thank you, David.
Thanks, wonderful memories.
In that 6-month review, Souness clearly acknowledged that his side wasn't yet the finished article. He said, "We still don't have a squad good enough to win the league, but we're on the hunt for another player." One interested spectator at Hampden for that Skull Cup final was Graham Roberts of Tottenham Hotspur, the subject of a pursuit that would last until Christmas before Souness finally got his man, the missing piece of his defensive jigsaw. As John mentioned, that Uwe Rehn goal may have been a source of yet more frustration, but it would be the last time Rangers fans would see their backline breached for more than 2 months. The concrete of a title-winning foundation was finally beginning to set. Next week, Andy and Alan will join me to discuss those 2 months, the New Year game, Hamilton, and all of that. Until then, bye for now.